So jazzy. Oh, yeah.
Didn't expect the built-in intro. It's impressive.
Yeah, well, the one thing that always throws people, as well as myself sometimes, is that we've never updated the video interstitial thing to actually not say stream starting soon. So we've had some people come on, they're like, oh fuck, is this live? Oh my god.
Yeah, I got a little thing in the corner that says live, and it's got the time, but this is not live though.
It's not live, thank God. I couldn't.
We're live. We're here. We're live. We're feeling.
You and I are live. You and I are live. But you know what? Welcome to the VGBees interview. That's right.
Thank you.
It's a brand new show in the VGBees podcast feed, focusing on conversations with fascinating figures around the games industry and beyond. I'm your host, John Warren, and you can go to VGBees.com/join if you want to support us by becoming a member of the Hive. Your support means we could do more stuff like this, like start a brand new show. And our guest today is the library director of the Video Game History Foundation, Phil Salvador. Hi, Phil.
Hello, it's good to finally be on. We had talked about, Nikki and I talked about this like a year ago, then we both just got busy and then things happened, so.
And Phil, I gotta be honest with you, this is probably the first conversation I've had with you that I can recall where I was sober. So.
Oh my god, that's right. We have only met at Summer Game Fest functions that were already a few hours in, so that's true.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but boy, I hit that week hard this time. I don't know what it was about that, but when in Rome, I don't know. But it was a fun time, and we talked about doing the show, and I'm so glad you've joined us. And I just want to say, listen, I think a lot of my listeners already know what the Video Game History Foundation is, but if they don't, I would love for you to kind of tell us about it. Tell us about your role with the foundation and all that stuff.
Yeah, the Video Game History Foundation is a nonprofit that we jokingly say we're trying to make game history better. But it really comes in a lot of forms. The big component of what we do is our digital archive. We have, over the years, amassed a large collection of material around video game history. We're continuing to. My job as library director is to turn that into a resource people can use. So we did last year finally launch our digital archive, which has increasing volumes of material around video game history to help people study and understand it. We also do things like we'll run pop-up exhibits at video game events. We'll go around and give talks about things. We'll work on advocacy around copyright reform, which is a very timely issue right now. Nothing timely, in the last 2 weeks at the time we're recording this that could have prompted that. But doing a lot with that, where it's really we have looked at specifically our founder Frank Cifaldi when we started. Where are the gaps in video game history right now? There are some really good video game museums out there. There are private collectors who already have a giant wall of games that they make YouTube videos in front of or whatever. We saw it as really being like people are missing some of that connective tissue and context to help understand game history, and we are trying to be a better resource for that.
Yeah, that's great. And what has maybe surprised you the most since officially joining? I know you volunteered with them over the years, but since officially joining as library director, what surprised you about the work itself?
It's going to be kind of a cop-out answer, but the odds and ends have been surprising. There are some things that are much more concrete. Our collection of video game magazines, for instance, that is very easy. Well, actually, that gets complicated too, but that's at least like, okay, here's the publication, here's its name, we put it on the shelf. But then it comes to things like, we have this random press kit from somewhere. Where did it come from? I'm not sure. And trying to figure out what to do organizationally with that in a way that's going to be helpful for people. That's the thing that's really been the kind of the guiding star. When we get a thing we don't know what to do with, it's like, okay, how can we make use of this? Someone sends a box of lanyards from E3 and it's like, oh, what the hell do we do with this? Right? It's a lot of those kind of how do we make this something useful questions. I've also learned, I've already was plugged into the world of digital copyright, but I have learned so much more recently about that in the last couple of years. So that was an adventure, but mainly it's, a big part of my job was, do we even know everything that we have? I don't want to give it up to Donald Rumsfeld, but his quote about the unknown unknowns where you don't know it is unbelievably real.
Sure.
That is extremely accurate for a lot of this kind of work.
Yeah, we don't have to hand it to Donnie, but he was cooking with that one that
Yeah,
one
no,
line. He
no,
got
no, yeah.
one. He got one. He got one in there,
He
and
he
that was about it.
created a bunch of wars to stabilize the whole region of the world, but he had a good quote though. That was a good one. That was
He had a lasting net negative impact on the entire global stage, but he did actually cook with that one quote. So it's hey, listen, a broken clock is right twice a day. I would like to get a little personal with you,
yeah.
and just I would love to know what resonates with you personally about this work. I know like you have a big knack for historian-minded projects, and I just kind of want to know where does that come from for you, and kind of in your background and upbringing. Like where is that like placing with you in terms of maybe how that developed?
I have a really specific story about why I've ended up caring about game history stuff. And it was
Okay.
as a kid, I was not as big on like console games and that sort of thing. I think the thing was usually associated with like, nostalgic memories. I was much
Hmm.
more of a computer game person because one, my brother was always playing the consoles, but also our local library had a really good computer game collection that we
Cool.
just borrowed from all the time. What really happened was, like a decade or so later, graduating high school, going to college, and I kept having thoughts about like, what was the weird game I played that one time? That was, it's never going to come back out again. What the heck was that? Realizing it's impossible to play them on modern computers at the time. Realizing there was no place to really get them. My usual like piracy sites weren't turning up. And I started asking like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if anyone's thought about that problem.
Hmm.
But as I started a blog called The Obscuratory where I started getting games like that. And over time, I just found myself more and more invested in like, okay, but why for some of these
Hmm.
games? Some of these
Hmm.
like weirder off the road titles that were doing experimental things. Like, why did they make that choice? Who was behind this? Where did the money come from? And that's the route I ended up going with a lot of my writing, was trying to figure that out. We jokingly said that the staff of the Video Game History Foundation are frustrated historians, and that is kind of it. Where it's like, I have wanted with the library, it's like I'm trying to build something that I would have killed for back then, and
Right.
even once in a while, like I will search for something in our library, be like, what the heck's going on? Something I had written about already, and it's like, can we find a resource about this? And almost always that is the case. My favorite one of those as a kid was an adventure game called The Labyrinth of Time, which is just aggressively surreal in a way that kind of permanently broke my kindergarten brain. And a while ago, we got a donation of press material, and it had the press release for that game. And it was like, this feels very full circle. It's like, this helps
That's
me
awesome.
understand how they were trying to sell this thing. And it's like, God, I would have loved to have seen this, like 15 years ago or so.
That's
So
cool.
that's really that's the motivating factor, I think.
That's great. That's amazing. I love that. What is maybe the last thing that you've pulled out? That's a great example. What's the last thing you maybe pulled out of the archive that either surprised or delighted or charmed you in a significant way?
I think I can mention a collection we are working on right now that I think is really relevant.
Okay.
At the time we're recording this, we're getting ready to launch a big collection of material related to E3. We got a
Oh,
pretty big
cool.
donation from one of the organizers of the E3 that has like all the brochures and stuff they were handing out.
Whoa, that's gonna be
But
sick. That's
it's
cool.
really, if you want to learn about the event itself, you're not going to get like, here's Nintendo's press kit, but it's like,
Right.
here's how much it costs to get your ad on the side of the expo hall, like those kind of things. Like, so it's
Yeah.
cool to know. But among those things was a DVD from E3 2009 that had all the photos that they took for publicity for the event. So it's like someone went behind the scenes and just like took 2,000 photos or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was one of those E3s I can remember, like watching it on G4 or whatever, and like, oh, there's the press conference I watched, and seeing the like photos behind the camera and just being like, all right, I've seen one side of this. Here is the other side now. And that was just really, it's you. I'm sure, being in the gaming press, everyone was like kind of old hat at that, but like seeing a picture of, like the Xbox press conference where they had turned the camera back around to the stands was like, oh, you don't see this. Like, this is not a thing that anyone has bothered taking pictures of. So that was also kind of thing like, all right, we're catching up to the stuff I lived through and I was paying attention to. Period.
Yeah, yeah, like it's so interesting. I mean, we spent a lot of time in LA at Summer Game Fest around a lot of like old heads in the games industry, and like yeah, a lot of this preservation stuff is catching up to the start of a lot of our careers, which is making me feel old and ancient, but also
Yeah.
honestly, like I'm warmed by that. I think like the industry is now kind of at an age where now there are kind of industry elders, and that feels actually weirdly comforting to me, despite the fact that we're in a free fall.
The reaction I've seen, I will say, from people who are old enough to now be history has been almost always positive. We had a
Yeah.
really great example we talked about where at 2024 Game Developers Conference, we did an exhibit about kind of unusual corners of game history from non-developers, and we had a
Mm.
section about the North Dakota Carmen Sandiego game, which was one of our projects from back in the day. Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego? It sold 10 copies, I think, is what they figured out. Um, but that was one where we had a press kit out. It was like the Broderbund press kit, and then an old guy came by and was like, "I'm on the cover of that," and he was actually really tickled. He
Whoa.
was like excited to see that, and he ended up
That's
donating it.
cool.
He ended up donating a bunch of stuff to us. We made a video about it. It's like that was really exciting. So I've heard people go like, "Oh, geez, I guess I'm history," but then people seem proud of that. People seem excited rather
Yeah.
than being like, it's time for me to walk off into the horizon and disappear forever or something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. All right. Let's switch gears a little bit to maybe some broader issues.
Mhm.
I'd love to dig into. Listen, we didn't plan it this way. Maybe we could have seen it coming. I don't know. That's maybe a different conversation. But of course, if you listen to the VGBees podcast this past week, we did cover extensively the move that Sony has announced that they're going to be discontinuing discs. This is kind of the end of physical media. A lot of reporting out there suggesting Xbox will probably follow suit. Of course, what they did absolutely follow suit in doing is initiate an expected group of layoffs that was roughly triple the size of actually what I even expected it to be, which is brutal. News today even dropping, not that this is a news podcast, we didn't have to get into it, but id Software totally decimated. They're going to have to be switching to Unreal Engine, which is
The silliest thing you could possibly do. That's
insulting on levels I can't really even conceptualize yet. I need like another 24 hours to maybe gather my thoughts on that. But in this 10-day span, we can talk about again the predictability of all of this, but we have more or less stamped an end date on physical disc media when it comes to having stuff on Blu-ray or DVD or whatever. Obviously, I can predict how you feel about this, but tell me in your own words how you kind of feel about these moves.
and this is what we said in the statement we put out, but weirdly, it has not hit me as hard as it has for a lot of people. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I think from a preservation angle, it doesn't make as much of an impact as you'd expect because, like, obviously, like a physical thing, you can put it on a shelf. That is very
sure,
important. But I think, as we said, it's like at this point, most games are not physical releases.
right.
When they do get them, I was thinking about was it? I want to say it was Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where like the version of the game they put on the disc has a completely different ending than the game that it was like got a day one release. So it's like oftentimes it's not even representative of what eventually consumers end up playing and blah blah
Right.
blah. So a lot of where my brain has been in a lot of this has been thinking about like, okay, how do we deal with the digital stuff though? Like if it's almost kind of like a practical, like, okay, if physical media is coming to an end, if this is realistically what's going to happen, how do we deal with this digital stuff? And of course the industry doesn't really have a good response to that.
No.
We can get into the weeds here and I can talk about like copyright exemptions and what kind of progress has been made, but among those announcements, the one that I think really knocked me off my socks was the discontinuing of the PS3 and Vita stores on the same day,
Same
which
day.
it's
Yeah.
a kind of thing where it's like what we can talk about this. We had considered those stores effectively defunct because they were so broken at this point in terms
Right.
of usability, but saying you can only get digital games. By the way, we're taking away the digital games is absurd. Like
Yeah.
that's a very funny contradiction. So I would say within the preservation community, that was a lot of the thought process was less like, how do we get Sony to reverse this choice and keep making small batch games that go out through boutique publishers, and more the like, okay, if this is what's happening, if this is the future of gaming, we have to figure out real solutions to preservation with this.
Yeah. 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 And maybe let's speak to that kind of digital preservation. I mean, a lot of people, even kind of, let's call them normies in my environment, are picking up on this news and asking me questions about, well, gosh, like, okay, so we don't kind of own anything anymore. And I was like, well, it's been a while since, most people have shown a preference for digital versions of these things, whether it be movies, whether it be video games. Like this choice has more or less been made by massive audiences. And the thing that seems to follow much later for most people, is the realization that you actually don't own anything. Do you think there is a viable solution? Let's not talk about how realistic it is for it to actually happen. But what would y'all be happy with in terms of digital rights and ownership of these digital goods? And then maybe try to tie it into preservation if that's possible.
I mean, I can't speak to a consumer angle because I don't know what the best solution is there. I know there's been a lot of people discussing things, and some of it have been very impractical. Some of it has been normal and practical. And it's a kind of thing where it's I don't think I can speak to what is urgent enough that we need to legislate or something like that. But what I will say for preservation is, we can work with stuff, even though you don't own anything. You still have files downloaded onto a system. This is going to get really in the weeds. You want to hear some copyright minutia that is unbelievably frustrating? Yeah,
let's do it.
Okay. There are a lot of allowances in copyright law that let you do things with materials. And a big part of that is, things like first sale, where when you buy a book, you can sell it to someone else. When we go into this all licensing regime, that's gone. Okay. It's so what else? What other tools do we have? For museums, libraries, and archives, fair use is very strong. Fair use is I forget, are you in the US or Canada? For some reason, I feel like you're in Canada.
I'm in Texas.
I don't know why I associated you with Canada. I'm not sure why that was.
I don't know either. Bless our Canadian brothers and sisters, but no, I'm
okay. I don't talk about Canadian law. Well, in U.S. law, there's a purposely wishy-washy. I won't say wishy-washy. It's broad privilege in law that says you can use copyrighted materials under these circumstances, and it's not affecting the market for the existing work. You're using only portions of it. It tends to be for one of these purposes. It's intentionally broad, and it always gets litigated in the courts. There's no this is or is not fair use test, but it gives libraries and archives that are doing preservation work a lot of flexibility in terms of okay, we can do things for preservation. We use fair use a lot for our library for getting materials up that are under copyright, but there's no meaningful market for it anymore. Then we're presenting it in an educational context. Theoretically, we could do something similar with video games. The problem is that DRM, digital rights, protections on consoles, all that stuff, that is a separate law that governs that. Those are not subject to fair use. So even if what you're doing is completely legal, you cannot, let's say, jailbreak a console and hack a game to make it work on an offline console. That's just not something we can do. For a while now, there is a process built in. I think even at the time they wrote that, they realized that law was too strong. So they have a process built in where you can petition to get exemptions to it. And it's often very limited in scope. And libraries and archives actually has some pretty decent exemptions. We can legally jailbreak a console to make it play a game we legally purchased, for instance. That's really cool. But then it kind of ends there. There's no pathway for doing anything with emulation with it. And these are really useful exemptions. Your listeners may not know this. In the US, legally, if you have an offline, fully playable offline game that connects to online servers, you can break that DRM if the servers go down. So if you have an online only games for Windows Live game or something, you can break that DRM legally. You are allowed to do that. No one can stop you. But when we start getting into the PS5 era and stuff it starts to get a little trickier, especially because, a legal purchase, it's okay, I bought a game, it's on my PS5. I'd have to trust that PS5 is going to work in 50 years. And, we're not thinking as much about longer term solutions to that. I think in our field, a lot of people are recognizing that Section 1201 is the part of the DMCA that governs this, what you can and can't do with digitally locked material and operating systems. I think we're all starting to realize this was probably too much and did not anticipate the degree to which everything in our life is software now. I mean, last year, one of the, actually it was, I guess 2024, one of the petitions was to let McDonald's franchisees break the DRM on their McFlurry machines in order to fix them, and they got that
right?
They got that exemption, which is awesome. But it's McFlurry machines should not be a copyright issue. This is absurd. So I think there's a lot of interest in wanting to revisit that. The exemption process, which we've been through, has started to feel a little fruitless. So I don't know exactly what that is, but it's very broad. When you ask, going back to your question, what would we be happy with? The broad answer is, a total reform of digital copyright law. That's absurd. But I think, getting greater permissions or even just acknowledgement from game developers like, hey, if libraries and archives are trying to preserve games on our system, like we're not going to interfere with that. Like that would go a huge distance to at least giving us tools to do something with, instead of just, having a copy of PT on a PlayStation 4 and then hoping we'll be able to access it at a later point.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you have like a lot of hope, or do you see a lot of movement in any of these major companies to kind of meet y'all at any stage and say, yes, we're willing to make a blanket statement like this? I mean, do you have any sense that that's ever on their radar?
Companies know, individuals, yes. And I don't want to go into too much detail because we have spoken with companies about this. But I will say, speaking with someone who worked for a major game company, I was at Summer Game Fest, I chatted with them and I brought some of this stuff up and they were like, yeah, that's really reasonable. Why would we say no to that? And that's very different than, having to a company that just, lays off a couple thousand people and shuts down studio. Not specifically saying Xbox. I was actually thinking of Bungie in that case as I was saying that. But when that kind of thing comes up, it's like
you could throw that at dartboard for this.
Oh
year.
yeah,
we could just hit whatever. Yeah.
Like, what nation is this company being purchased by? Like all those questions. Yeah,
right.
But when it comes to that, obviously companies move slower. But when you talk to people who are involved with this stuff, they understand it's an issue and they want to do something about it. But it's just hard to get traction on a thing where it's like, would you like to have less control of your rights? Like, that's not going to get the C-suite excited.
Well, the C-suite is increasingly shareholder brained, like, at a degree. Like, I actually, it has been, I'm so cynical about corporate America, like unbelievably cynical. But even for me, it has been a little surprising how shareholder brained Sony and Xbox have both been in terms of their decision making. So like I think that's why I asked that question. I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that individuals that you talk to would be like, well, this all seems reasonable. But the idea of that getting up to Asha Sharma or something and her being like, oh, sure, feels...
Yeah. I think what we've seen is companies care about this when it becomes a publicity issue for them and when there's a risk of external things affecting them. Like the video game violence crisis, that's why what is now the ESA was founded. Like child safety and loot boxes, that's been a huge focus. So it's the kind of thing where we have seen one now unsuccessful bill around this issue. And it's like the game industry likes to self-regulate. I don't know if we're quite hitting the threshold where they're ready to start doing that and start asking those questions, but we're getting there, I think, as more and more concerns come up like this. Like when you have like Kojima weighing in on your publishing policies, it's like this is starting to getting to a point where it's like maybe you do need to like head this off or find a solution so this stops being an albatross.
Yeah. I want to talk about a study that you wrote back in 2023.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
It's wonderful. It is dense. It is dense in a good way. It is comprehensive. We will put a link to it in our show notes. And you were invited to read it. But it is a study that y'all did. You wrote. Essentially saying 13% of pre-2010 U.S. games are commercially available. Has that number shifted at all over the past 3 years?
I haven't attempted to re-examine it. I would say it's probably trended upward, but not a lot. And even as it has, other things have fallen off. As games just happen to get delisted and platforms shut down. I mentioned the PS3 stuff earlier. That would have brought our total down by about 1.5%, but the store was so functionally broken that we decided not to count it. I asked a lawyer, and they said if you have to do a Reddit workaround to download games, it is not reasonably available. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But it has been promising to see more games. And this is going to sound weird. It's been promising to see more shitty games getting re-released because it's like someone thinks there's a market for that. It's not just going to be Mario. Someone thinks that there's going to like people. Maybe there is a market for like a Nickelodeon tie-in game for Super Nintendo collection. Like that's kind of inspiring. That's great. But I think the point we wanted to make with it, and that I think we made effectively, was that even though that happens, it is not quite a drop in a bucket, but it's, there is this like such a larger corpus of stuff that's never going to be touched for all those systemic reasons. For like, there's going to be emulation issues. There's going to be big legal challenges. Even games that were on our list that I think got republished have since then gone off sale again because they were tied to an external IP. So it's like, we talked about that in the study. It's always going to be temporary. Talking with lawyers who helped us with the study, they were actually really excited, less the data and more about the explaining, like, this is why it is, because I think everything in the study is stuff we kind of already knew, but nobody had tried to like quantify before and like explain to a layperson, like, this is why it's this case. I want to give a big shout out to the secret co-author of the study, Claire Fox, who asked not to be credited as co-author, but I'm going to call her out anyway in public. She is a digital preservationist, I believe, at Yale right now, and does not know about a lot about like the game market and the game scene, but was very engaged with this and really helped us like dial this in a way that was like scientific and people could understand without like, you know, very funny is small notes, but I think, you know, at one point I referred to Metal Gear Solid 3 in the report as, you know, being quote, like one of the greatest games of all time. And she said something where it's like, that term means nothing to me. Like, rephrase this. Like, that's great. I love it so much. That's wonderful. But yeah, it's been funny because so many people have used that study for really whatever they want to talk about, where it's like, whether it's someone who wants, you know, it's about copyright reform issues, which is what we did it for, or someone who just wants to get mad at Nintendo. Like, people tend to cite this study a lot. And it's like, we said when it launched, we were joked that it's like, okay, 87%. It's like, we're going to start seeing that number out of context. And that's how we know it's going to matter, when it just becomes like part of the ether. And I think we got to that point, which feels good.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's fun. How long did it take to kind of put that together? I'm curious, because I've psychology background, written papers like that before. This kind of, you know, how long did that take to kind of get all that together?
I would say in total about a year, and that was with some fits and starts. We published it in kind of like late spring 2023. I started early 2022, and that was one of the things I came in with. Like, we worked with a group called the Software Preservation Network that is actually in the middle of shutting down right now, which is really disappointing. They're the ones who are really leading the charge on the copyright stuff. And hey, it turns out like universities don't want to put money towards software and game preservation, so they have it's really unfortunate, but it's a good group, and we're staying in touch, and we have a meeting like literally tomorrow with like figuring out like, you know, what's next steps. But
that's cool.
What was I saying? Right. So this was something they knew they wanted to do more with games and get like actual evidence for discussing, you know, game availability. Because right now, even still, like then and now, it was researchers and everyone in the field saying most games aren't available. And then, you know, trade organizations saying, yes, they are. And it's like, okay, let's refute this with stats, which they were unable to do. It didn't end up mattering. The Copyright Office didn't actually care or read the study, so it doesn't matter. But it was, the point being, we came in with wanting to do that, and it took a little bit to like get our volunteer infrastructure set up. But, you know, we spent a lot of time formulating how we wanted to do it. But I would say start of data gathering to publishing, it was probably 5 months, which is not that long because we have a very good volunteer base that was able to really crack like manually figuring out all this data. We had a session after we got all the data in. Me and our former co-director, Kelsey Lewin, had a call where we just sat down with all the discrepancies. We went through everything marked yes and everything where people had conflicting data. And we just like, okay, is Final Fantasy IV easy type different than the version on Steam? Like those kind of questions, like those philosophical questions. So
that's really great.
87% is approximate. I think now maybe it's closer to like 85 or something. And if we had like a margin of error, I think like 1.5%. But either way, like I think the cap is closer to like, you know, 25% availability of like all possible games getting re-released. And we're not even close to that right now.
Yeah. Okay. Boy. All right. I think a question I have, which is a little definitional, and I don't know if like maybe I'm conflating this. I know I see people conflating them online, but can you make a distinction between a game that is preserved versus accessible? Like,
I mean, that's honestly one of the big questions from other institutions and ours is kind of the relationship between preservation and access. And I tend to be more on the, if there is no meaningful access path, the preservation doesn't matter side. One of the people we had on but at the copyright hearings who spoke in previous years was Bo Ruberg, a scholar at a university, and oh my God, I can't remember where they work. I'm so sorry, Bo. But they had a great quote where it's like, preservation without access is not preservation in their mind, where it's like, you know, I think I want to be careful about this because when people think about preservation access, they think like, oh, I can get it for free and download it and play it on my, like, you know, Einthor or something. And it's like, that's not necessarily what it means. Access can mean a lot of things. It can be, you know, controlled access to something. It can be, you know, there is a pathway for doing something with this game or having some way to work with it. There are more, you know, formal museums and archives and groups that, can't take as much risk when it comes to like sharing materials. And so like I think about, and I love you, Andrew, at the Strong Museum of Play. We argue about this a lot, but like the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, first of all, is amazing. I think we talked about this at Summer Game Fest, but
we did. Yeah.
They have an incredible, extensive physical game collection, and their pathway right now is you have to, you go on site and you sit down and play the games, which is kind of what they can do surefire legally in a way that's not going to get them in trouble, because they are a giant institution with a lot of money, and like that would put a target on their backs if they're just sharing access to that stuff without some kind of very intense permission structure. But it does also get frustrating because it's like it's they might have like a unique development build of something, or they might have like an extremely long game that it's like, okay, the only way to play this is to plan a trip to Rochester, and that's tough for people. That's challenging. And we brought that up, and I say that with a lot of respect and love for the work they do, where it's like, I think we all think about access differently, and there are ways to make things a little more accessible without necessarily sharing the game files. Like I know the Strong's been trying to do more where they're like recording gameplay of stuff so people can access that and use it as reference. We do that for some games we don't really have a lot of physical games, but for ones that we do try to do some component of that as well, just to make sure, people can look at it in some form. It's a tough balancing act, and that's obviously complicated by legal factors, but I think I am more on the side of trying to push the boundaries of what access means a little bit. A big part of the copyright reform stuff we were involved with was trying to get more permissions around remote access to games, where it's like, okay, if we have this game, we have a way to put it in an in-browser emulator in a way that's secure and you can't download it. Sure. Like we should be able to work with our tools, and we can't because of those restrictions I mentioned earlier. So I think everyone's going to have a different answer to access. I will say I get very frustrated when the people who just want to put everything on their hard drive yell at museums and say, why are you not putting the ROMs online, you hoarders? That is stupid. They are doing the best they can with the resources and the legal bounds they have. But I think it is worth pushing a little bit on that and seeing what else we can do with that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think some of this, especially on the ROM side, Frank Cifaldi was giving an interview, I believe, with PC Gamer or somewhere this week about piracy, and
I think it was just a post on Blue Sky that was being quoted.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about piracy and maybe the Foundation's stance on that, maybe your personal stance on piracy. Piracy is certainly something that I've been, I think, very open about on the show and elsewhere, saying, I'm not a pioneer in this. I'm not one of the first people to really be comfortable with this, but I do think I was earlier to the party than most about saying I'm good with piracy, especially for things that have no real path of being available to me. And I'm just curious about, y'all's stance and maybe your personal stance on this.
My thought on a lot of this has been, first off, I know there are a lot of, like I said, there are people who are, it's like, I can pirate this. That is preservation for me. And it's like, we're not super worried about you. We're thinking about 100 years from now. And so like a lot of that is less relevant, but it's something that really changed my perspective on a lot of this. There is a conference that happens at the Strong Museum every couple of years called Save the Games. And there was a preservation last year from, I believe his name is Timothy Yimstuve, and he is a film archivist. And he's working at, like a local film museum. Rochester is where like the Kodak company is based. And so like, a lot of that happening there. And he had this great discussion about the idea that piracy is the start of preservation in many cases, where he says that, piracy as an activity is not necessarily an act of preservation. But he mentioned that a lot of foundational silent film archives came from like unauthorized duplicates or people keeping copies that were supposed to be destroyed. And that can be the start of something. So I look at, somebody who has like the main good set or something. And it's like, yeah, that's the way most people are accessing things. Someone downloading that and playing it, it's like, that is not necessarily an act of preservation, but 40 years from now, if we need a copy of it, that's going to be it in a lot of cases, unless there is some place that has an extensive collection of every possible arcade board. So it's the kind of thing where it is a delicate balance where, it's like, you don't want to be like, pirate everything, it's great. And then be like, game companies, we want to work with you. Like, it's a little hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
But I think it is, I think we have to acknowledge the role that piracy has played in a lot of this. I said at a GDC talk a couple of years ago that, today's piracy tools end up being tomorrow's preservation tools. And like, there's no doubt in my mind that, when we work with materials, we often use hardware and tools that were originally developed by like the ROM community.
Sure.
There's no doubt in my mind that like whatever the equivalent of Yuzu is in 30 years is going to be the way you play Switch games.
Totally.
So it's tough. It's one of those things where it's like you can't like full on endorse it and be like, yeah, piracy is great, but it's like the techniques and the bodies being built up by those communities are going to matter in the long term.
Yeah.
It's not reasonable if you're a researcher who wants to play a 35-year-old game being like, okay, you know what Duck Station is? Okay, you got to find the BIOS. It's like, it's absurd. But
yeah, no, I think a lot about how easy it would be if people were reasonable to create a bright line, whether it's legally or just kind of like a blanket agreement about, we're constantly moving the year at which it is acceptable to go before it and say, yeah, no, we're good with just pirate, do whatever you want. It would be so easy to do that. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point, but it especially with Nintendo, they're so litigious. They're so unbelievably litigious about this stuff. But I don't know. I'm thinking about piracy a lot over the past few weeks.
Yeah, I mean it's not a standard you can I think ever get any consistent agreement on,
No.
but it is the kind of thing though where it's like that is practically how many or most people are going to experience video games, like older video games that are out of print. I think we had a number in the study that it was like what percentage? I think it was like I can't remember what small percentage it was of games pre-1980 that are still in print, and it was dispiriting low because there's not a market for that. People don't want to buy like these primitive racing games unless. And here's the thing, unless it's part of like a digital Eclipse Atari 50 type collection, right? Sure. And it's like, that is inspiring. Like seeing a lot of that stuff happening, like realizing there's a market for contextualizing this. Yeah. I think it is good that companies are seeing there is a market for this stuff. They can do this kind of stuff. And like, no surprises here. A lot of that is built on work done by the emulation community that was demonized by the game industry 30 years ago. Sure. And hey, we have the receipts, we have the trade magazines showing every company trying to like ban emulators. Like we know that happened. We know you're using those. Like, yeah, it's
yeah. Yeah, no, it's steeped in irony.
Yeah, but
which is not surprising. Yeah.
I think the nice thing is that there is no such thing as just like one right way to preserve something. It's not like, here's the standards body for preservation. We have this thing in a box that's labeled just so on a shelf and now it's preserved forever. It's like everyone has a different pathway. And I think it is fine to look at that as being different populations and different tools and different resources. Yeah. That said, I think the degree to which a lot of people are comfortable saying, oh, piracy is fine, is not thinking about the 100-year future. In a way that sometimes feels selfish. Sometimes I think people just, most people don't need to think 100 years in the future, but like, that's what, organizations like ours or museums, that's our job. And so that's the frustration we're hitting it's like, practically, if I want to play, I don't know, Pit Fighter, I don't know why that was the first one that came to mind.
Pit Fighter's a great pull. That's a great pull.
It's not a great game, but like if I want to play Pit Fighter, I've got options. But if I'm thinking about someone from 100 years who wants to play and understand Pit Fighter, we got to start thinking about infrastructure and amending rights and things.
Yeah. There's not a bar in Dallas that you can go to and play Pit Fighter like I used to do when my parents would take me to. I can't remember what the name of it was. I feel like it was Billy Bob's, and it was here.
That sounds like a place you'd play Pit Fighter at, Billy Bob's. Yeah,
there was absolutely a Pit Fighter machine there, and I would play it a lot. So, I
do want to clarify because I felt bad saying that people who want to pirate things are selfish, and I didn't mean it that way. What I meant is more. It's like it's your self-interest, right? It's like that's you're meeting your needs and not necessarily thinking about the bigger picture. Just to be clear about that.
Because, no. I don't think it is controversial to say that 99.9% of people who are doing this piracy collection stuff are doing it because they want to have their own little collection, not because they're like, I'm starting a museum, and
I was picturing the Reddit headline: VGHF library director says pirates are selfish. It's like no, that's not what I meant.
No, it's a good clarification, but I totally knew what you meant. That makes sense. I would love to talk about we've talked about a lot of legal issues, things like that. The foundation structure around, do y'all have a legal team that you're always working with? Does that shift? Like, who are you working
So,
with to do these things?
sort of. We do
Yeah,
have lawyers. I would say we primarily work with Harvard Cyber Law has helped us a lot with just kind of
cool.
drafting policies for things. They
Yeah.
have, a cyber law. You can kind of tell when that was founded based on the name, but like they have, not just great lawyers, but also students who are coming in who want to work on stuff. So like
Hmm.
developing fair use rationales that we have, kind of filed away for justifying a lot of the work we're doing is great. Um, for individual projects or cases where like things come up or there's rights holder issues,
Yeah.
we do retain a firm that I'm okay calling them out. Albert Sellers is awesome. It's our friend Kendra is one of the partners on that, and they're great. Kendra is formerly from Harvard Cyber Law, but they are just
Great.
experts on this stuff and figuring out how to work with it, and have been wonderful. And boy, having a lawyer who is well versed in digital copyright issues is a blessing. When you
Yeah.
have to figure out things like, can we work with the likeness rights for this material? I can tell you, in all relevant states we have had to look at, archives do not have an obligation there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, very different than, putting something in a commercial setting, for instance. But
This is certainly a minutia question, which you do not have to answer if
yeah,
it gets you into any sort of weirdness. But like, you talked a little bit about how like there are no hard and fast. I mean, going through business school, that was the big bright line thing. I went to a digital media management business school, so we would talk about music and movies and film and video games, all this stuff.
mhm.
And the one thing that was very clear is like, well, it matters what judge you get and what district you're in and all of these things. Do y'all devise strategy about where to fight those battles, or are those decisions basically made for you when you take these cases on?
That's not something I had to think about yet, thankfully.
Okay, okay,
It
that's good.
really is for us. It is more, and this is something I was taught that I love, is thinking less about things like venues and more just about what's the likelihood something's going to happen. I was told
Yeah,
the idea that there is a big difference between what is your on paper risk and what is your practical risk.
yeah,
And for a lot of these materials, actually, I think I can say this, that with the exception of Cookie's Bustle, we have not received a copyright takedown notice for any material in our digital archive yet. But it's because we're being smart about it. We're not trying to piss people off.
yeah,
We're presenting it in a scholarly context with a researcher agreement and all these
right,
things. And that, a lot of it really is risk mitigation strategy. It is about,
yeah,
don't be stupid the way you're doing this. You do have rights and privileges. Use them responsibly. If that question does come up, that can become a conversation
hmm,
before it ends up going to like a court,
a court,
right? Well, but
sure,
thankfully, something we have, like, I thought about, like, when you're mentioning that, like, all the weird things where cases get like all the spurious cases that get filed in that one district in Texas. Like,
right,
we have not
exactly,
had to think about that yet. Thank
yeah,
goodness.
yeah, that's good. I'm glad. All right, so let's talk about the library itself, the digital library.
My baby, yeah.
It's so cool. Launched earlier last year, and what like doubled in size since y'all
It has,
launched
I
it,
think it is
something
now
like that.
doubled in size. When we launched, it was
Yeah,
about 3,000 items. We're at like 6,000 now. I think if you look at raw file counts, I want to say it was about 30,000 then and 70,000 now when you're thinking about like individual files on CDs and stuff. So this thing just keeps
amazing.
growing. We keep pumping more stuff into it. It feels great.
That's awesome. Is there something, a collection or a piece or whatever that has joined since you opened it that that wasn't there at the very start that you're particularly psyched about?
I can name a really weird one that wasn't there before
Love
that I
that.
think I think people are not. This is one that did not get a ton of attention because it is extremely dry, but I love it. It is the William Volk collection. He was
Oh,
the vice president at Activision in the early 90s during like the transition when Bobby Kotick took over the company and they were like exploring new platforms, and it is his hard drive backups of all of his like memos and stuff. And so it's not
whoa.
like, we have found people get excited when it's like a cool picture where it's like, oh, there's the N64. Like, people get excited about this.
Sure.
That is not this collection, but it is a memo he wrote where he's like, okay, I just went to Nintendo and they showed me something called the Super Nintendo. Here are my thoughts about it.
That's
Like,
awesome.
that's really cool. It's like he would
That's
go to
awesome.
trade shows and be like, all right, they announced this thing called the 3DO, and I don't like that you can't use your own video codec on it. You have to use their built-in hardware codec. I'm not crazy about this. Like, seeing those kind of like,
That's
that
so
is
cool.
gold. Seeing him
Yeah.
just like, I went to GDC. I had lunch with this person from Sega, and like, that's so cool to like
Yeah.
see someone who was in charge of that level of evaluation, there was a back and forth email thread that I think we have in there where it was like, and I guess they were using email in like 89 or so, but talking internally about how he was like, we need to start like pivoting to CD-ROM. This is going to be a big deal. Like, what games do we have we can do CD-ROM editions of? And then a programmer or producer complaining, being like, your resources are in the wrong place. Our big hit is going to be Ghostbusters. I think the Ghostbusters 2, and I think the line was something like, I need to know what you are doing to prioritize Ghostbusters 2, which is okay, in fairness, Ghostbusters 1 was a big hit for Activision. Like, it was a big hit for them, but it's just, it's really neat seeing those conversations in a way you rarely do. Like, having access to that kind of material, that's the stuff you never see. It's like, people get excited about the magazines. I don't think I'm ever not going to be able to get access to an issue of GamePro somehow, even though that is like even though that is a huge part of our corpus and a cornerstone of what we're doing. Like, that kind of behind the scenes stuff is what gets me really jazzed. My favorite one, I think I mentioned this in the video we did. William Volk was the technical director on a game called Return to Zork, which was in the Zork Adventure series, one of their first big CD-ROM games. A lot about the development of like the tech behind it and the the FMV system. But he also was paying attention to what competitors were doing. He had a file where he went on CompuServe message boards and saved every comment he could find about the seventh guest, just to like get public opinion and understand what people were saying, which is cool on its own.
Yeah.
But it gets even better. Going through it, one of the comments, it was from someone who was like, I played the seventh guest. Here's my review. It's like, it was really fun, but some of the puzzles were boring, but the graphics and sound were really cool. What do you think? Let me know. Written by Jeff Keighley, who I believe was 14 at the time.
Oh my God.
We reached out to him. He confirmed that was his CompuServe user number. So 100% we have preserved, I think, Jeff Keighley's first video game review.
That's kind of amazing. That's really incredible.
You never know where those things are going to intersect by someone just saving a random thing, and then 40 years later it shows up and it's suddenly relevant again.
I think it's so. Yeah, I mean, I mean, listen, you and I are in total agreement. That kind of dry archive of that is so fascinating to me, because you are seeing someone's moment-to-moment, day-to-day dedication to this thing that we've all in this industry have like dedicated so much time and energy toward. And whether or not we end up like agreeing or liking or whatever to these people, they're watching their thought process kind of manifest on those, in those memos, in those emails, on those notes. Like, that's really valuable. That's really, really valuable to me. Yeah.
Again, people get excited when it's like a press kit or a flyer for a game they know. That is really cool. But like, we got a donation.
That's filtered. That's filtered, right?
And it is still very cool, but it's also like, picture a cloud. Like, that's exciting. But like, I think about a collection we got donated that we can't share for a while. We actually have embargo terms for it. But it was from a producer who worked on the God of War games. And it was like their journals they kept at the time during production. I will say way more than I expected of their work was about the like Office 365 transition. But like that's the real stuff. That's the real stories. That's actually the real shit is. So yeah. So that was really funny. That's the kind of thing where it's like, we do think about, what gets people excited when we put some collections out. And it's like, there are things that are going to show up in books years from now that are going to be valuable to historians. There are things that will just also get people excited to see them. And we do try to balance both those, because we want people to go to the library and see what we have and learn how to explore it. And then also have, okay, I'm going to go on a tangent. I mentioned before this that I am making tea right now. I'm a big tea person. I went to a tea festival in Brooklyn years ago with a friend, and we went to a booth. We knew the tea manufacturer. We were like, oh, we love your stuff. Oh, we love the really smoky, roasty teas. And they were like, well, the real shit, come back here. And they took us back behind the table and they brought out the smokiest tea. It just smelled like cigarettes almost. It was just like, I had to like seal it in multiple Tupperware containers. It was crazy. It was amazing tea. But it was like, yeah, the public's not going to care about that stuff. You lure them in with like the brighter stuff. And then if people want that, you have it. So part of it is like, we do have some things that are flashier. I was talking with a preservationist who was like, anytime you do anything with Sonic, people go nuts. Like, people love to see like children intuitively love Sonic. I don't know what it is, but it's like, that kind of thing does get people excited and bring things in. And then you can be like, oh, so you're having fun digging into these primary sources. you want to see the emails from this guy at Activision? Well, let me tell you, yeah. So that's
let me tell you. Let me tell you, that's where the real action is.
We like to think it's a tool that turns, or our hope is that it will turn people into better researchers, is the goal.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned kind of like, getting people in the door. And this is kind of a conversation that Nikki and I had. Nikki Grayson, who hosts, in case you're not listening to our normal shows and just listening to this, hosts the VGBees podcast together. Nikki was like, please ask Phil how he is managing this kind of library and museum that is so digitally accessible. Are y'all having conversations about like audience size and like getting people kind of in the door, almost like you would like a website or something like that? Are y'all talking about stuff like that?
Yes and no. I mean,
Okay.
we recently conducted a study with, University of Washington conducted it for us, but, getting a better sense of who our audience is. And yeah, a significant portion is people who just want to look at stuff because it's cool and they're interested in history rather than someone like
Sure.
writing a book.
Right.
I think the way we see it is the library is kind of our product. I have joked that I am the chief product officer. And
Hey,
honestly,
about right.
a lot of people who support VGHF, and I love them, support kind of broadly the idea of preservation, and I think are not necessarily like our user base in a lot of cases. People who are just like, yeah, preservation, fight the good fight, here's $5 a month, and I love them. But it is the kind of thing where something like the library, I think part of it is it's like the idea of it existing is what people are supporting, which makes me really happy. It's like I would love if our users also support us, and they do, but it is the case where I think we have a board member who will get at me about like improving SEO. And it's like, I don't see that as our job. It's like, it's the resources here, we can promote it. And, we see promoting we do think about promoting the library, but it's often in the context of like, let's make content about this. We have been doing more videos. We have a contractor, John Raridan, who works for Nintendo World Report, has been doing some really great videos for us where it's like, here's some cool stuff and let's kind of direct you back to the library with it. So like, he did a video recently about like, was Earthbound actually a flop in the US? And looking at like the reviews and the advertising and seeing what people didn't like about it and being able to say like, here's how you do primary source research. I don't know. That is when I think about promoting the library, I think about it less in terms of like metrics and do we have, 1 billion users a day? Like I think about it less in those terms. And it's a timely joke. If you're listening to this later, it's a joke that was very funny in July 2026. But I do think about it in terms of how do we get people inspired to look at the library, to go beyond like, oh, it's cool this exists. And we're like, oh, I can do this in a way I wasn't expecting. And we've seen comments to that effect where it's like, oh, that's how you do research at the library. I think about, because we mentioned Digital Eclipse, they had Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection come out last year. And, they have historians on staff. They have Chris Kohler, the editorial director, Dan Amrich, who is a former games journalist, does a lot of work for them. He works there, I should say. He's not, he doesn't do work. He works for Digital Eclipse. But I was watching a streamer play it, and there was a video feature they did in that called like, who put the K in Mortal Kombat? And, they interview like one person's like, oh yeah, I did that. I went to a whiteboard and I wrote the K down and everyone cheered. And they cut to someone else who's like, that's not true. And they're like, here's my story. And they keep cutting back and forth. And the streamer was like, bro, those two stories were different. So what's the truth? And it's like, you could see him starting to think like a historian. And it's like, that made me like, if we can do that with our resources, that to me is more important than any individual metric. Like, it's just like, can we move people along the gradient of history enthusiast to someone who didn't think of themselves as a researcher who maybe is?
I love that. I love that, especially because I think I do have this like I think broad worry about just like, which I think is a normal worry, but I also think it's like a little bit unfounded. But I do have just a broader worry about people becoming less engaged with their own, I don't know, their own interests. They just kind of like let those things passively wash over them instead of really engaging with them on a deeper level. And I do love this project as something that can invite people more into that kind of mindset. I think that's really great.
And I will say there are things where like we have, not to say cut our losses, but like, we have thought about like this isn't having the impact we have. Maybe we don't do this as much. We used to
Right.
do more in terms of like live events, for instance. We would have like
Sure.
live stream events where we bring in like people from game history and talk about it. Some of them did well, and some of them didn't. It was like,
Right.
given our limited staffing, we want to reallocate our resources on this. And like,
Yeah.
this is kind of the cornerstone of what we do, where it's like we see it as a cycle where it's like we get things in, we turn it into a resource, we talk about it, that gets people excited, and that fuels the engine to then keep doing that. And so far it's working, so we're feeling good about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think a question I have, especially about the digital library, is what is the step between, okay, we acquired this collection and now it is online? Like what happens in between those things?
More time and labor than you would expect. Because
yeah.
part of it, I mean, because I will say there's the traditional processing that happens in any kind of archive where like you get the stuff in, you figure out what even is it, how do we organize this, how do we start putting it in folders and putting it in boxes and those kind of questions. And then, of course, creating the catalog records, it's time consuming, and making sure you have relevant, like everyone's name is on there. You have the important, like information describing the nature of it and making sure that's readable for people. But I think compared to other institutions, since we think of ourselves as digital first, that is another significant step. Because digitizing is tough. Often it can't be done non-destructively. And so there's a lot of cases where we have to think about, like, can we dedicate the time and labor to this? Do we have the resources for this? We might have a one-of-a-kind thing, and it's like, do we disassemble this in the interest of scanning it? And right now that tends to lean towards no, but I'll give you a very, not a silly example, but one of the more boondoggle examples that I think was worth it was we had the complete run of a magazine called Games Business. It was like a game. It was the is it GameIndustry.biz is the website. It's like it was the print version of that in the 90s, which is crazy. I think it had a circulation of like a couple thousand people. We have a complete run. That's wild. It is a broadsheet newspaper style thing, and we can't feed that through like a feed scanner.
Sure.
So we made the call. It's like, we have every issue. We are going to chop these in half so we can feed them through. We went down to our friend and lady at Stanford, who had access to like a 2-foot paper cutter in their periodical section. And we're like, we're going to chop, and we're eventually going to get them like bound into a book so people can flip through them. And it's like, that was a case where we made that call. But even after doing, that wasn't just like, okay, now we can digitize it. It was like, we have to go down to Stanford, we have to work for a day on this, and then we go back up, and then we feed these things through. I will say for the E3 project, this is a more extreme example, but we've been scanning the show dailies they handed out. And so we have some of the really old like show dailies from like 97 we just completed. And those we didn't feel comfortable chopping it. So I had to do flatbed individual scans from those. And I got a repetitive stress injury because doing the 95 to 97 show dailies and reaching over, opening the scanner, flipping it for doing like 400 pages. After a while, it catches up to your shoulder. This is the first day where I felt like full strength regained. So, it was after like a week of being like, I'm not doing any more of this.
The things we do for our craft,
those are silly examples. But I say that because digitization is an additional step in the process, and it's not time and labor neutral. And a museum like the Museum of Play can take in larger collections and papers because they're not like, we're going to scan 100 linear feet of paper. Like, that's not practical. Versus, I think we mentioned we acquired the press materials that were at Game Informer magazine. They were donated to us by Reiner and Andy McNamara. The Andes gave them to us, and that's one where it's like, that's a couple hundred linear feet of paper. We are going to have to digitize it. It is a, existential threat of like, oh God, we have to start dealing with this at some point. My goal is to finally start cracking it by end of the year. But it's the kind of thing where it's like a larger institution can afford to not deal with that. They can afford to have that in boxes and call it up when researchers need it. So we are good at moving very fast on things. We are good at like, if we get a duplicate magazine in, we can debind it. We can put it through our like OCR text recognition system, turn it into a PDF, get it into the library, sync it up with the metadata, and make it accessible in the span of like an hour, maybe. Like, that feels amazing. Wow. That is incredible. Wow. But it does also mean for bigger collections, it just takes us more time because we have to. This is a weird way to put it, but it's like, especially when it's a kind of big miscellaneous collection of stuff, in a lot of cases, if it's a physical collection, you could just say like miscellaneous ephemera. If we're doing it digitally, it helps to break it out a little bit more. So I have a collection right now with a folder called MISC that is currently 100 different sections in it. And it's like, I got to condense this. Like, this is not tenable. But I think especially, I would much rather break that out when we can and then put up a 1,000 page PDF and be like, there's some stuff in here. I don't know.
It is. Like, right. Yeah. Have fun. Maybe this could be a totally boring question, but in terms of like your back end of how you're organizing and keeping track of this stuff, like does all this stuff exist on a spreadsheet? Does it all like where are y'all archiving the specific kind of collection data for all this?
We use an industry standard tool called ArchiveSpace. It is used by basically everyone in this field. It is a super flexible power tool for doing archival organization and lets us do all kind of great things that break the rules of library science when it makes sense to do so. That's awesome. I love it. I love ArchiveSpace. And so that metadata is then what fuels everything else in our system. This is getting into the weeds, but it is funny. Our digital stuff is managed in a separate system because ArchiveSpace is just data. It has no notion of like, here's a file it goes with. Right. So a huge part of when I first started was like figuring out how we get those things to talk with each other. We have a volunteer programmer who helps us with those things. And it was just like explaining metadata processes and how do we get these things to synchronize. And I learned so much about Python and just a lot of those kind of questions.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I don't know how many people actually think it's interesting, but I love stuff like that in terms of like, okay, yes, you have this industry standard organization thing, but now you got to put it online. You got to do all this other stuff. And dude, it's like all these things don't naturally talk to each other. Yeah.
I don't think I had the ability to screen share. Otherwise, I would show you one of my spreadsheets when we're importing metadata and I make, an Excel sheet that the columns go into like CZ because it's like I have to have all these different separate types of data. Yeah. And it's like, okay, there's 10 different people named on this. So I have to put person's name, person's ID, role type, role relator. And like it just goes on and on and on like that. It's I love it. My thing is I say, it's very tempting in this job to not have work-life balance. It's very tempting to be like, oh, I want to work in this all the time. But the line I set for myself is like, I will do it if it's something I'm having fun doing and I would be doing for fun anyway. The problem is I have a lot of fun organizing things like that. So that often it's like, oh, I want to do some metadata. But
that's really funny. Yeah, I'm just going to get a little metadata done. Just don't wait up for me or whatever.
My frustrating thing is I figured out that my like idle, I need something to do is I like to project manage, which is very unfortunate. So I find myself just like wanting to do that in other spheres of my life, being like, all right, what's the timeline on this? It's like, no, it's not.
That's really, really good. Y'all did some preservation projects with like GamePro CD, Sega Channel.
Oh my goodness,
These are decaying physical media. Like, what has been maybe the most like technically harrowing project y'all have had?
Two things I would say. First off, the Sega Channel project is a huge one because that was, someone came to us with data. How do I work with this? And that was a big challenge. That was, I think we mentioned in our video about that, all the various people we had to bring in to figure out how to work. Like you cannot do that alone. I like to say that, our work is not, game preservation is not one discipline. It is 100 different disciplines. And so it was like, all right, not only do we need someone who knows how like Sega ROMs work, but we also need someone who knows how to like decrypt this format and do reverse engineering of compressed data. And someone who like, to rip the DAT tapes that had the data on them in the first place. And, ad nauseum. There's still some more stuff in that project. I don't think there's a lot in terms of like games, but we have like internal data. And it was just like, like they're like internal project tracking. And it was like, we just got to put this off for now. It's like people want to see like the exciting stuff. We can get to the rest later. But in general, I would say obsolete formats are always a big nightmare. DAT tapes especially are one of our least favorite things in the world. I don't know if your listeners or even you are familiar with data tapes as a concept, but it was how things were backed up for a very long time. Rather than like bring it to a CD, it was making a backup on a tape. And to read, the thing is, there was no universal standard for those. So to back it up, you need the software that was backed up with. And I will tell you, here's my favorite. We have a volunteer I love. His name is Keith. He is a local person who is very into Macintosh and has a lot of hardware. There are times when it's like, hey, we have this Macintosh backup. Can you do something with this? And he has to physically bring in a Macintosh to our offices and set it up and do that. And here's the really bizarre one. we got this I think is the most ambitious like layers of digital archaeology thing we had to do so far. We got a donation from David Marsh, who owns the rights to the ICOM catalog. ICOM Simulations did like Uninvited, Shadowgate, all those games. And so it's like he backed up all source code and stuff. And so it's like, oh my God, we have like the source code to like, like Deja Vu. Like this is crazy. And we got it. We sent a sample to our tape person, who I will also add recently passed away. So now we're trying to find a new tape.
Oh,
the people who know how to do this aren't going to be around forever.
No.
Yeah. So we got to revisit that. But so his last thing for us was he got us this tape backup, and we got it, and it was just files called 1 through 15. We had no idea what they were. It was not in any documented form we could know of. Chuck, our tape guy, rest in paradise, Chuck, did not know what to do with them. He's like, I've never seen this format before. Whoa. So we brought Keith in, and we started digging through the files, and we figured out okay, the data seems to be in this portion. The file structure folder seems to be in this portion of the data. And two things we figured out. One, about half that tape was an old backup that had been overwritten but not deleted. So it was like, okay, this portion of the data is not relevant.
Yeah.
But then also, Keith started poking at it, was like, okay, I think I found a way. If I point a Macintosh at this, I can figure out where the files are. He, let's be clear, was able to decipher enough to figure out what program it was done with. It was a program that was not dumped or emulated, but there was a later version. The company that made it got like bought by somebody else or did a later version of the program. Yeah. We were able to compare notes and figure out some of how it's organized. And he did enough work to extract that program out of that data so that we could then extract the rest of the disk. It's crazy. But hey, now awesome. we have the raw assets for like the ICOM games now. It's great. So it's here's the problem. That was a lot of fun. There were like 30 tapes in that collection. So it's like, oh boy, we get to keep doing this. What backup program are you using next week?
No idea.
Because like
it'll change. Yeah.
Enterprise backup software from the 80s is not well documented. It turns out. So yeah, it's a lot of that kind of stuff is deeply harrowing. But boy, like I think the most fun we have in the office is when we get a proof of life or something. When it's like the first viable, like, okay, we have something. Frank right now is working with a very exciting prototype game that I'm staying mum about for now, but it's one where it's like it's required a lot of like disassembly of stuff and looking at graphics data. But he's like, oh my God, a reassembled thing. And he puts the GIF in the group chat. Everyone just loses their, it's great. It's
That's amazing. Well, but you're making me think about like, especially with like the data tape stuff, the cascading like layers of, okay, y'all are trying to preserve this thing, but you also need essentially historians of these other format types to get through. Like it's all connected. There's this crazy web that goes into this, I guess, which I don't really think about.
It takes a village. I will not pretend to be self-sufficient. None of us are. We absolutely depend. I mentioned earlier relying on the tools made by like the emulation community. Like we're so dependent on that kind of thing to understand how any of this stuff works. We have a lot of people we bring on for individual projects. We did some data reverse engineering, and we had one of the engineers on ScumVM come in and help us like working on some like it wasn't even a project related to ScumVM. He's just someone who knows how to work with these formats. So it was just like it's a fun opportunity when there are people who are hyper specialized who just know what to do. We did a stream last year where we got a lot of unidentified loose ROM chips, and it was like, we're gonna see what's on these. And there was some cool unique stuff, but like we had people in chat who was like, if we give you the data, can you reconstitute this into a ROM? And they were like, maybe. So we had people in chat who were live going through as we were doing that, just like updating, like, okay, I think we have graphics. Okay, maybe another ROM in your set has the sound. We don't know. Like, just we really rely on the community so much to get any of this stuff done. So I always try to we try to make sure to credit the people who contribute to these things. We talk about this because, man, none of this would happen if it was just one person. Anyone who thinks that they are like an island and they alone can do this work is a fool. Just straight up.
Yeah, no, obviously a ton goes into it, even way more than I think I really envisioned, especially when you talk about these old data formats. What we kind of touched on it before in terms of like making decisions about prioritizing things. Do y'all have what are your conversations like about what is worthy of inclusion? Or do y'all have a lot of conversations about that kind of thing?
For us, I think the broad statement we say internally is we collect context. And so for us, it's like we tend not to go after things that were available at retail because people have taken care of that in a lot of respects.
Right.
When it comes to development materials, I think it really is just like, can this tell us something? I think is really the question. Like, can this tell us not just how this individual game was made, but how games were made? A really good example I think is maybe less on people's radar is we got a donation from the creative director at a company called Cyberflix from back in the day. And that was a company that made like interactive movie type games. They had their own bespoke engine for it. And it was actually really neat because it was meant to be like, this is something non-programmers can use. It was like, this is a kind of like, easy to like build together a set for like, we can hire a screenwriter who doesn't know how to do like, C or something like that. And so it is things related to that. It's like, we have the draft scripts where you can see the language they made for their engine. And like, that's like, people don't know about, Cyberflix, but like we have the memos where they're talking about like, okay, if we cut a demo for this game and release it at these periods, what audiences are we going to be getting? It's like, that's a lot of insight into like, how games got produced, how games got sold. Sure. Versus if someone comes to us and is like, I've got all these old t-shirts, like that's really cool. And I probably want some of those for myself, but like, I don't think that has as much of a research application. And that's just a different priority than other institutions. I think sometimes like we never want to be in a place where we say absolutely not, but like someone will come to us being like, I've got documentation of this old computer system that games were made for. We'll be like, go talk to the Computer History Museum. It's like, that is so much more in the wheelhouse of what makes sense. I really get excited about things where even though it may itself not be super interesting, it is, I think, it speaks to what was happening in games more broadly. An example I love, and this is one of our other, hopefully end of the year collections we're working on right now, is we have the papers from the head of sales and marketing at Sunsoft from back in the day. Cool. And it's a lot. It's not about the game design as much. It's much more about how they're being presented. And so a lot of it is stuff like, like the contracts they were signing with licensors around like how long they have the rights to produce things. It's like, we get the rights to use these trademarks through the end of physical production on this project. And it's like, okay, that's why it's so difficult to like, re-license those things. They had a letter in there that was not a letter, it was like an invoice for the person they hired to wear the Arrow the Acrobat suit at the Consumer Electronics Show. I think they were paid $200 a day plus parking, I think is what they got. But it's like, I have never seen the finances on hiring a mascot character for a trade show. So like, even if you're not interested in Arrow, you can picture that the person. I'm not sure if you've seen that picture of the really depressing Yoshi costume they had one year at CES. Well, your viewers, I would say, look for Mario Yoshi costume CES. And it's like, like a costume where it's like someone dressed as Mario with like a fake Yoshi head, but Yoshi's always drooping, looks like he's going through like a depressive episode. It's like, he was probably getting paid the market rate for that. Whatever person had to bring the Yoshi suit from home and show up with that thing.
Yep.
So I think it really is just like, is there research value what we have here? There are things that I think are exciting and fun novelties, and sometimes it breaks my heart to pass on them, but it's like, are we the place that, like, we're not alone in this. So it's like, are we the place that is best suited to work with this? And does this fit our mission of wanting to help people who are trying to understand game history better? It is funny. We'll occasionally get donations from someone who's like, I had this thing, I don't want it anymore, but I feel like it's important. If you want to throw it away, you have absolved me of having to think about it. Great. It's like, cool. That's fine.
Cool. That's great. Yeah. That's really funny.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like magazine preservation, what is kind of maybe on your horizon of like, what's your kind of end game for magazines? There are still things that I feel like are fairly well preserved in the magazine space. Like, do you have a goal specifically for game magazines with your digital collection?
So we're feeling really good right now because we have a pretty big chunk of US covered. Obviously, not everything we have is in the digital archive, but I think at this point we're like 98% on game and computer magazines. The things I think we get excited about, or not excited, but thinking about on the horizon about, are either things that are slightly out of scope or things that go beyond the US. When I say slightly out of scope, I mean like, there were not video game magazines for a while, and the extent of that ever getting covered was in like VCR magazines, for instance. So we have a whole section of our shelves where it's like every issue of like Video Review. It's like, do we even keep these? Like, we don't, like, we just haven't evaluated a lot of that. There is a magazine, I forget what, I think it was called the Coin Box, but it was like, magazine for the coin op industries. And so one issue will be Space Invaders, and the next one will be about cigarette vending machines. And like, I think it is important to see what different context games were being talked about it in. But that is a, like, how do we start presenting this thoughtfully so that when you search for something in our digital archive, you're not going to get all the cigarette magazines. But I think the one that we're putting our brain to right now is international magazines, and specifically Japanese ones, and specifically around accessibility of those materials, because there are folks who are preserving them, but I will say that, like, it's a combination of two things. One, they are all in Japanese that is often inaccessible to non-Japanese speaking researchers. There are groups in Japan collecting this stuff, but Japan tends to have much stricter copyright policies, so there's often less, permissiveness around sharing those. So we've been thinking a lot about, like, okay, we're in a position where we can do something about that. We do have access to some of these, like, fair use things we talked about before for long out of print periodicals. But we've also seen groups that have experimented with, like, we used AI to translate all these, and boy, that gets backlash. And so our brain right now is like, how do we make these accessible to an English-speaking audience without compromising the integrity of the material? And so we're exploring the idea right now of, like, indexing. Like, can we create a list of the articles in this magazine? So it's like, if you're looking for a game, we can at least expose the name that way. So we're working with a professional translator to try to figure out, like, is there a standard or best practices we should be doing for this? I think that's where our brain is right now, because a lot of the major magazines are covered. We do have a lot of the more obscure ones that we love just peppering into the collection. We just added, this is not one I recommend anyone read, but Insight Video Gaming is, boy, that's a magazine. That was a magazine that ran for like a year in the 2000s. It was trying to be like game coverage for men. So it was the first issue has a picture of The Rock holding an N64 controller.
That's amazing.
And it's like, it is just kind of very fratty, but then there will be an article that's like how to cheat on your girlfriend. And it's like, oh, they had a target audience with this magazine. We have.
Oh, I remember PC Accelerator. Do you remember that? Do you remember that magazine?
I have not prioritized putting that in our digital library. That is
some white hot shit.
Verges on just like actual hate speech at times. It's pretty bad. Yeah,
it's really crazy. Yeah, I remember it well though. Yeah.
But like there are some more of those obscure ones that we're still working on. But I think as we're thinking about like what's the future of this collection of the magazine, corpus, I guess it is about like. We have a lot of Japanese magazines. A lot of the groups that scan them send us the pages afterwards so we can like have the issues on our shelves. And I think as we're feeling very good about the state of magazine collections, like that's kind of the next big mountain to tackle and figure out how we're going to do it. Still a work in progress as of this recording.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I just want to ask you, what do you want for the library? What do you want for the foundation? Maybe speak more to the library, but in the next 5 years, like, do you have specific kind of goals in mind? Any sort of major things that you want to do with the library?
I mean, there are two things I will say. One is in terms of the feature set of the library, we're in a good place because we can expand on what we call the renderers in our library, where it's like we can present PDFs very well. We are in the process of replacing our renderer for images because we know people have not been happy with that. That is the one that came out of the box with Preservica, and we are fixing that. But there's also just things like, we talk about things like source code access. That is kind of our big white whale. It's like, how do we do that responsibly? I don't know if this is a 5 years thing, but I've always had the idea of like, it is theoretically possible to spin up a virtual machine with like of the era build tools that you can play around with. Like that's something we could hypothetically do, or like providing, I think we can provide access to non-copy protected games and software in a controlled fashion. It's like, that's something we want to explore, but we've been drowning under all these other projects where it's just like, that is a like pie in the sky later, but like exploring other ways we can present stuff is, I think, is a big deal for me for like, what else can we put in there? The other thing, and this is less on my part, is I'm really excited about seeing the library in use because research takes time to do. And, we've started seeing people, like, I think we just recently figured out Wikipedia has started using us as the go-to citation for magazines, which, oh my God, I'm so happy about that.
That's cool.
But it's like, I want to see more projects that use us and cite us. And that's going to take time to happen. But like, it's tough to measure the impact of, okay, we have a library, here you go. And like, people will look at it, sure, but like, what does it actually do for history as a field? When we start having, more YouTube videos we can point to that cite us, and we have books that mention the library, like that to me that's the real measure of like, as we continue to grow this, are we having an impact? Is like, is it reaching the audience that we want to use it? That is more out of my hands. That is like saying, what's your goal for, your project? It's like, I want 1 million people to play it. It's like, well, there's only so much you can do there. But
yeah,
what gets me excited about the library is seeing how people respond to it and where it shows up. And that's, I think it's just going to be a longer timeline on seeing what that looks like. But hey, we recently hired our first development manager who was in charge of fundraising. We've been having a lot of conversations about like impact and our narrative, and boy, I'm excited to see how those things turn out. So
that's exciting. That's exciting. Phil, do you know what I just searched in the digital archive?
Is it, I'm trying to remember what the horrible thing we searched for was. Anal leakage was one of the first things. When we launched the library and we were showing it to people, they were like, oh, can you find like swear words? And so they typed that in, and I think there was one hit for anal leakage. So
that's incredible. I did not search for that.
Okay.
I searched for Shenmue, Phil.
Oh, Shenmue. Okay.
I love Shenmue so much. I'm one of Shenmue's biggest fans.
What came up when you searched for Shenmue?
First of all, it is 38 pages of results.
I'm looking at that now too, and it sure is. Yeah, I'm seeing
It is 752 magazine libraries entries. There are, I will tell you this, 74 options from the Larry Flint publication.
So Larry Flint Publications published Tips and Tricks magazine.
Yes,
that is not well known, but that is
very funny. It's very funny for that to show up.
Larry Flint, huge Shenmue fan. Actually, it's not really widely reported, but
yeah. They wanted to put that in the movie about his life, but they felt like there was just not enough time to show him buying the Dreamcast and all that stuff. And just
And I will say that we recently redid our portal to add more context around results, because it is very easy to get false hits when it's like a magazine that has a price list in it. Like I'm seeing a lot of the ones for Tips and Tricks. It's an ad saying strategy guides for Pokemon Stadium, WWF, Shenmue, and so on and so on. And it's like we people have said like, oh, how do you filter those out? It's like, we can't like go through an index.
Right.
I think we figured out in the library right now there are 500,000 pages of magazines. It's like that is awesome. Far beyond our scope. So let's make it so you can filter out the noise. Is kind of the goal.
That makes sense. That's awesome. Well, Phil, I would love for you to tell us how folks can materially actually help the Video Game History Foundation. Donations, volunteering, contributions, like how can people actually engage with y'all in those ways?
Well, I'll say first off, I wish we had more opportunities for volunteers, but given our small staff, it's just tough for us to wrangle that. But there's ways people can help. Obviously, donations, like especially recurring donations, help. Patreon.com/gamehistory.org. We do have a Discord full of game historians, and we get, early access to our podcast episodes. You get to ask questions for podcast episodes. We just recorded one with the founder of the ESA, and people got to ask questions about the founding of E3. So, hey, if you want to do that, that's an option. We do have some other ways people can help. If you have old game magazines, we will take them. We're always looking for, quality upgrades on our shelves, extra copies to do scanning with. If we don't need them, we send them out through a mystery box program, or we'll do like, hey, you can subscribe and get a mystery magazine. So if you have like a stack of old Game Pros, that actually does turn into real money for us, which is really nice. Honestly, same thing with like, we've had people donate their game collections, and honestly, we sell them like in a lot of cases where it's like, if we don't need it, it's like, if this is something that's taken care of, that helps from a fundraiser perspective, the same way that like, cars for kids or whatever, like there's a little bit of that angle too. Yeah. But I think honestly, and I alluded to this when I mentioned the stuff about impact, a big way people can help is just by talking about what we're doing and sharing it with people. I think about, there's so many videos about, retro gaming, like retrospectives on games. And I'll be honest, a lot of them aren't great. A lot of them are summarizing Wikipedia. If we start seeing people like becoming researchers and drawing on the kind of primary source material we have, that makes a huge difference for us in being able to talk about the work we're doing. Because, we do talk with like potential bigger donors, and being able to say like, this is getting further from your question of how can people help you, but like
Sure.
when we did our survey, we found a lot of people now associate us very strongly with video game magazines to the exclusion of other resources that exist for that. And it was like, yeah, our conclusion is you own magazine research for video games now. And that's crazy to me. That happened in a year. And it's like, if we can tangibly show what that looks like and being like, we have changed how people talk about game history in the public, that's a huge deal. So like, if you are someone who is into that kind of thing, if you're making there was just a video that came out that has like 100K views that's like a retrospective on Army Men, and we shared a bunch of materials with them, and like that's huge to us. That is really exciting. So if you can't donate but you are engaged with this stuff, if you're like a retro streamer, like find a way to incorporate this kind of stuff. That makes us really happy, and it makes us easier to tell this kind of narrative about how we are, like I said at the very start of this episode, making history better, and that ties everything together into one loop.
That's perfect. Phil, you've been a delightful first guest on the
Amazing. You have to start ranking everything. Everything's either above or below Phil episode from here. I'm the baseline.
It's a high bar, my friend. So
I'm the Dino Wars destruction of Spongulus of this of this interview series.
Yes, no, it's so great. And of course, you can go to gamehistory.org, also archive.gamehistory.org. That is where the digital library is. It is easy, folks, to get a little lost in it. It is fun to just keep diving and diving and diving. I've done it many, many times, and I recommend it to you if you have not yet checked it out. So
I get lost in it too. I find things I didn't realize we had often. So
that's awesome. That's the best, and that's coming from the director of the library. So
I can't read all 500,000 pages. We'll have a file, and it's like, all right,
come on, Phil, you're managing the whole thing. You got to read every single word too.
Here's the secret: librarians don't know everything, but they know where it is.
They do know where it is.
I can help you find stuff, but I don't know. Like I'll end with this really fun example. We recently put up a bunch of recordings from GDC 1989. We came across a set of tapes from that, and that was really cool. And we put them up, and we weren't able to like do a full transcription on them. We were able to figure out who the speakers were. That was a small conference. It was like people who were involved in the industry in '89. Yeah. Someone was listening to those recordings. And at one point there was a talk and they call on someone. It's like, hey, Warren, what's up, Warren? And he's like, yeah, I'm new to the game industry. It's like, oh, this is Warren Spector.
Warren Spector.
He at that point had been in the game industry for 3 weeks. And so it was like, oh, this is the first recording of Warren Spector, computer game designer. Like, there's always going to be things that we have not noticed or found in these collections. So like, share those too. Oh my God. Every time I see something like that, it makes my week.
That's the best. All right, Phil, thanks so much. And then listen, everyone at home, if you like this interview, if you like the VGBees podcast, you can go to VGBees.com/join. Join the Hive, and we're going to do more interviews like this. This is the first of many. I love to do these kind of formats, deep dive into different people and different things around the industry and beyond. And this has been a lot of fun. Once again, Phil, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
We're gonna listen to this jazz one more time. Oh, here we go.
Happening in post.
Oh, it's getting louder. All right, folks. We'll see y'all next time we do this. Bye, everybody.